The Wall Street Journal reported on March 17th, the hidden rot in the jobs numbers. Hours worked are declining, resulting in the equivalent of a net loss of 100,000 jobs since September. Most commentators viewed the February jobs report released on March 7th as good news, indicating that the labor market is on a favorable growth path. A more careful reading shows that employment actually fell, as it has in 4 out of the past 6 months, and in more than 1/3 of the months during the past 2 years. Although it is often overlooked, a key statistic for understanding the labor market is the length of the average work week. Small changes in the average work week imply large changes in total hours worked. The average work week in the U.S. has fallen to 34.2 hours in February from 34.5 hours in September 2013, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. That decline, coupled with mediocre job creation, implies that the total hours of employment have decreased over the period. One possibility for the declining average work week is the Affordable Care Act. Surprise, surprise. The law induces businesses with fewer than 50 full-time employees, full-time defined as 30 hours per week, to keep the number of hours low to avoid having to provide health insurance. The jury is still out on this explanation, but research by National Bureau of Economic Research, February 2013, has shown that laws that can be evaded by keeping firms small or hours low can have significant effects on employment. Gee, you think? What this shows is that people are adapting to the new reality. What is the new reality? Economic growth is no longer the norm in the American economy. It's not just an issue of boom and bust. It's an issue of general and relative stagnation. In short, the economy is simply no longer growing, and the numbers are showing that. Now, this is a psychological issue, not only an economic issue. People tend to adapt to what they cannot control or change. In a sense, this is healthy. No one person can single-handedly make the economy grow or produce jobs out of thin air. So in a way, it's rational to say, okay, I'll just change my concept of a work week. The problem here is that a stagnating economy is not inevitable. It doesn't have to be that way. For most of its history, the American economy has grown. Like I said, growth has been the norm and not the exception. For America's first century, the standard of living grew at unprecedented levels in all of human history to date. In its second century, the 20th century, the government began to hamper the private economy with things like the income tax, massive entitlement programs starting with Social Security, then on to Medicare, agricultural subsidies, and all the rest. Even so, the economy still grew in the 20th century. We began to have periods of boom and bust thanks to the government intervention and taxation and regulation and all the controls, which led to busts every so often, most particularly the Great Depression of the 1930s. That was a huge bust. And the second biggest bust is the continuing Great Recession that we have today. Now, the question today in 2014 is this. Are most Americans going to accept this sort of economic stagnation and decline as the new normal? And as a result, will they stop expecting their elected leaders to create conditions which allow for and permit economic growth? Will they opt for things like extended unemployment benefits, free health insurance, and all sorts of other goodies? Will the proverbial 51% say, in effect, hey, just so government keeps providing all this safety net stuff of goods and services, who cares if the economy stops growing? Clearly, as of the last election, this is what's happening. Now, if that trend continues, there will no longer be growth as the norm, at least not in the United States. It's really up to the people, and we're at a crucial turning point over the next few years and the next several elections. We have to remember that 100% of jobs and economic activity comes from the private sector. There is no government sector, not without money taken or borrowed from the private sector. If the private sector disappeared tomorrow, government programs would dry up and disappear. There would be no Social Security, no Medicare, no bridges, no farm subsidies, no highways, none of the things that the government typically pays for. This should be a non-controversial, even an obvious point, but instead it's one widely ignored. We do so at our peril.